Okay, and we are in the home stretch. Wow, what a great day so far. It's already our last session. We've made it, almost there. We saved some of the best for last though, so don't go turning off your computers just yet. And we're not quite yet to the Peloton giveaway. So again, in the chat forum, please fill out the survey, register that you're still here, secure your chance to win a Peloton. And if that's not enough incentive, I want to welcome back to the stage Amin and Michelle, who are going to be talking about something that's on top of all of our minds these days. So that's GA4. So Michelle and Amin are going to talk to us about what retailers need to know. So Amin, I'll let you take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pat. Really excited to be here to talk about the future of Google Analytics with the latest and greatest version, GA4. As Pat mentioned, there's been a lot of chatter, not just from Google, but also from us, from our partners, from the industry. So yeah, I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about why it's important, what retailers need to know, what you can do to get started. And just as a quick preface, we work closely with Google product teams on the roadmap and some of the things we can't share, but what we definitely wanted to spend some time on today is the value, some of the pain points that it solves for, and just how to get started. So we'll jump in with the slide that's shown right now, GA4 in a nutshell. What we wanted to do is explain first, what is Google Analytics 4? What is this big change? By looking back, the launch of Universal Analytics several years back brought with it a few different data types, depending on the digital asset that you're trying to track. So for websites, you have page views. For mobile apps, they're screen views. But with Universal Analytics, based on the name, there was still capability to capture data from any device, given it's universal. And I know Alessandro earlier today walked through an amazing case study there of how Ecentria with OpticsPlan and various other websites they have brought different data from different off-site sources, if you will, and some of the value there. And that's really what Universal Analytics unlocked. But as you can see from the screen, there were still different data types, whether you're analyzing in the reports, websites, or mobile apps. Another, with the growth of mobile application usage and the importance there to measure mobile apps more in depth, that's where Google also released Firebase and Firebase Analytics. And that was really the next iteration for mobile apps, which changed the data type that was included within that reporting. So Firebase Analytics was then launched and made the go-to approach for mobile app reporting. That changed the data type to be centered around events and parameters, where Universal Analytics and for websites was still very much page view focused, heavy emphasis on sessions, which required still a lot of processing and inconsistencies between how you measure and report on websites versus how you measure on mobile apps. It was not unified between these different devices. And again, a lot more reliance on the Universal Analytics side on the sessions and processing of cookies and connecting different things, where Firebase Analytics was more straightforward. It was events and parameters as kind of that approach. And ultimately, Universal Analytics wasn't quite as scalable as Firebase based on the data type and data collection model on Google's end. So we've seen firsthand how Universal Analytics, because of all the processing and based on it being page view and session focused, that could lead to some irregularities or just challenges where Firebase Analytics was built to scale. So based on this history, Google looked at the data collection model between the two and launched App Plus Web, which is now called Google Analytics 4 as the latest and greatest version, which with Google Analytics 4 now available both for websites or mobile applications, it takes the Firebase Analytics data type and model, the event-based model for how data is collected, but now applies it to any digital asset. So websites can now use the event parameter structure, which can lead to a lot of benefits. Not only does it unify better both on the back end and in the reporting suite, when you're looking cross-device, all the data and all the parameters and reports, but also solves a lot of challenges that were very difficult when just looking at Universal Analytics and the session-based approach as well. So we're going to spend a few minutes to talk about the pain points. There's a lot more that we could have put on this slide or in this presentation, but we wanted to distill it when Michelle and I were working on this to 3 key pain points and how GA4 provides a solution to those. So one I've been talking about, disjointed data sets, takes a lot of time to combine and make sense of when you're looking cross-device or even within single type of digital assets. Just the session-based approach takes a lot of processing and understanding of how that data works together and all the metrics. Where the unified event data collection, event-based model not only allows for cross-platform, apps and web together, it's also designed to be more privacy-focused because it's based on events and the interactions and the parameters within those versus session-based metric and methodology primarily, which relies a lot on cookies and the browser technologies, which are always changing. And in the identity resolution session earlier today was touched on heavily about how that's shifting. So GA4 is designed to be privacy-focused because of its event-based model and data collection approach. Also, with excessive ETL, this was a pain point with universal analytics and really with analytics platforms in general. There's a lot of process that goes into extracting the data out of GA into BigQuery or other platforms and running some modeling on it and then pumping it back into GA to pump to GMP, and lots of amazing value from that, which I know the Google team and others earlier today talked through. But what we see with GA4 available now and definitely in the roadmap and in the future is even more robust ability to do this type of ETL and targeting and audience building, but right within the platform. It also gives you the added power of predictive analytics or predictive metrics included right in the UI versus always having to extract that and run modeling on top of it. Of course, there's customizations that are powerful that still work when you pull the data out. So the integrations that currently Universal Analytics has will maintain with GA4 for the most part. But there's just a little bit more capability right within the UI that we've seen on that front. And even Michael shared that earlier. I know I'm referencing a lot of sessions, but trying to connect it all together here. He showed some visuals from CLV built right into the GA4 interface. Again, to help it be more robust and accessible, these advanced applications. To ultimately, the final pain point, speed up analysis, speed up activation, and allow marketers and advertisers to get those answers that they are looking for from their data in a more timely way, whether that's through all the tools I mentioned before, or with GA4, there's now both structure and flexibility with how reporting works. You can use the standardized reports that are available out of the box, pre-built, even with some customization, who can see what data, even more than Universal has today from a user permission perspective. But also there's a lot more white space. So the analysis hub section of GA4 basically lets you build a report with from scratch. You're not totally confined to the pre-configurations in the UI that you might have with Universal Analytics. And I think this is a really big advantage and something we've heard from a lot of our partners that other tools do well, or why they prefer Data Studio or Looker or other platforms as well. Now within GA4, you'll also have that white space for reporting, yet still structure, which is important for enterprises that we know. I do have a small bolded bullet there to shout out to user pathing reports. This has been a big ask for a long time, and though Universal Analytics has some, and other tools have some user pathing reports, GA4 has really crisp, clean ones that are really designed to help marketers understand navigation of customers on their websites and apps. And then built-in machine learning, which I've touched on. So anomaly detection right there in the UI, and intelligence hub, and really taking that power of Google and the modeling and everything that Google builds and providing it right within the GA4 tool. So you can ask questions right into GA4 and get your answers back simply and quickly. So this is a little bit of the summary here of the various key pain points and solutions that we see from GA4 in this event-based model. But I'm going to pass it over to Michelle, because one of the other real values of GA4 is around the user-centric or user-first approach as well that this allows. So Michelle, I'll pass it over to you. Talk about that.
Cool. Thank you. Hi again, everyone. So yeah, let's talk about this user-based approach and kind of why there is such a big benefit to having that as the foundation of your analytics in GA4. So let's kind of lay the groundwork here. In universal analytics, you have a session-based model, right? And so for retailers, this is really talking about the main thing that we care about, conversion rate. So in looking at these 3 sessions, in this situation, this is 3 sessions from the same user. So in the first session here, they find a product listing ad, they come to your website for the first time, they set up an account, they add different preferences, and they favorite some items, but they don't purchase. So right now, that session, from like a traditional e-commerce conversion rate standpoint, they just did some stuff and left. They didn't convert. Now they come back, because they've set up an account, they come back via email. They're on their purchase journey. So they've looked at like some question and answers on your PDPs, they've browsed reviews, they've even added another product to their favorites. But again, they don't convert. So when you're looking at that session holistically, they haven't really given you value yet. Now in that third session, let's say that they come in from a Google search, they reference their favorites list, and then they finally convert. If we go to the next slide, just a little build, that third session, it is really where you're going to give credit and put emphasis on that value, right? Like those behaviors within that session are very closely linked to the conversion that happened. And let's just say, for simplicity's sake, this session resulted in a $100 purchase. So in the universal analytics session-based model, it's really emphasis on that third session as like being the quote successful session. So now let's go to the GA4 user-based model. There really is less emphasis on an actual session and more emphasis on looking at your user holistically. So you can look at all of these actions that the user took, but together all of these different things that the user did, so like favoriting an item, creating an account, all of the different marketing channels they came in from, they lead to a holistic understanding of now that user has given you $100 in value, and all of those touch points really matter in this equation. So for retailers, this is a really big shift, but it's also a very exciting one. And if we go to the next slide. So we have the list, right, of pain points and then solutions resulting from this user-based data model. And I really want to focus on this first one. So the current pain point, as illustrated by that example that we just walked through, is that transactional sessions are king. Non-purchase interactions are not valued unless the session converts. And so what we're going to see through GA4 is really that all engagements matter. In the GA4 model, which, right, it's event-based, you're looking at things holistically on the user level, it's really showing the evolution of this customer relationship and how all of these, even like micro engagements that they have had with your brand, have led to ultimately their value. We also gave another shout out here to some of those user pathing reports, just because this would be a way that you can really identify what different events, since everything is on that event-based model, did lead to the value that your user has shown so far. So that's the first thing. And I think that that is the most exciting thing, like emphasizing other events that are less transactional, but are equally, if not in some cases more important, to build that intrinsic value in that relationship with your brand. All of that matters now. So, well, as far as your data is concerned. The second thing, so we've gone through some more complex LTV use cases and whatnot, but in the universal analytics world, it can be very manual to decide what exact data points you're going to include. Not to say that like all of that stuff is really valuable, but it does hinge on you having experts and time and resources to be able to build those types of models. In Google Analytics 4, there is going to be predictive LTV. And so that it's going to be able to show you estimated purchase behavior without needing to have to do everything so manually. Of course, there's benefit to really going deep and to building out those custom models, but you're going to be able to get that right out of the box. And so that can really just elevate your analytics game, even if you don't necessarily have the resources or time to implement something more detailed. And then finally, a pain point with universal analytics, right? Cleared cookies can lead to data loss, less insight into your customers. That's just kind of the name of the game with any sort of behavioral site app analytics platform. But within GA4, there's something called consent mode. It's still in beta, but it's essentially giving you some modeled conversion data to fill in any gaps that do come up because of different privacy concerns that your customers have. So rather than having like a bunch of lost information, there is some plugging in the gaps and some supplemental data that you can use to really just enrich your entire understanding of what's happening with your users. And next slide. Cool. So going into dual tagging, what we have really started to encourage a lot of our clients to do is run GA4 side by side to universal analytics. And actually deploying that does consist of a few steps, right? So like one, document what you're currently collecting with GA4. The second thing is kind of thinking like if you pick up your exact universal analytics implementation and then plop it into GA4, like what does that translation look like? And then actually planning for that implementation. One really big call out here is the data does look very different because as an e-commerce industry, we are so used to looking at conversion rate, like, and that's session-based, right? So going back to the point of the data being user-based, with starting to even look at GA4 and the data that it provides, something that we are really advising is just get it on your site and start looking at the reporting suites. Start tagging some of your events and seeing what that data looks like. Because you're still optimizing and doing everything off of universal analytics, you can really use this upfront implementation time period to get it right and to put a stake in the ground, try it out, and then you can make some adjustments and then really hit the ground running with GA4. But this is kind of our overall process. It's just a very exciting time to kind of shift, but it is also a very different just system to work in. So just setting yourself up for success and getting familiar with these changes sooner rather than later is definitely going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in here too, Michelle, just to say a few things. Like when we work with our partners, we have heard feedback around, we've invested a lot of time, energy, and effort into our current analytics implementation, and we feel very mature with our analytics today, and we understand GA4 is coming and there's a lot of features not rolled out yet, so maybe we can tackle it later on. And understand that sentiment, but to Michelle's point, you know, we used to say and talk about a migration process, and my team would know that I have personally advocated to remove the word migration and focus on dual tagging. The reason I say that is because, yes, there's a lot of features being rolled out this year and next year by Google, and in the future for GA4 exclusively. I think no more universal analytics updates really that are major. But by getting the implementation even lightly done now, and maybe just for a few pilot sites or brands, if you're a global conglomerate or multi-brand, starting now will allow you to explore some of the features. We're not advocating any of our clients, and I don't think Google is either, to say a hard cutoff from Universal to GA4 today. Dual tagging has been kind of the standard recommendation here, to have GA4 deployed, even in a minimal fashion, to start, have that data collection, layer on the implementation as you go, and build that historical data so that next year or later, you know, when more features and reports are launched, you have data to use and to explore and experiment with all these new latest and greatest features. And I saw a question, which I'll touch on, around analysis capabilities such as churn, retention modeling, a few things that we mentioned, but we didn't show slides around, from the machine learning, anomaly detection, things like that. All these are coming. Some we can and cannot share depending if you're under NDA with Google, with GA360. But the idea here is that you can have access to all these tools when they launch if you dual tag now, even in a minimal fashion. And you know, the process that we outline here to fully deploy GA4 with all the events and attributes and parameters that you might have collected today might be a huge effort, but starting small and phasing it out, that's our recommendation, so that you can still have access to the tools and maybe iterate your deployment process as you're kind of building out for the future. So a lot of those reports and features might be launched. Shameless plug, and I know we'll say this again, but we do have a webinar later this month that we will be sharing a little bit more of the reporting capability for what we can publicly, but directly with your Google partners, or if you're partners with us, you know, under the NDA with GA360, we can share a little bit more about some of those features. But I wanted to just touch on that as well.
Yeah, and one additional thing, Amin, if you don't mind, as far as kind of even the capabilities that exist within the platform, that will ultimately depend on your tagging architecture and how you do decide to roll out all of your event structure. So that is another kind of reason for sooner rather than later deployment, so that you can see, like, okay, we want to put all of this information in our event's name, and then we want to use additional parameters to add more context. And it may take a couple of tries to figure out how detailed do you need to be based on that you want to do. So even your analytics capabilities are going to hinge on some of that work, and just getting ahead of it and having like even a testing period or trial and error period where you are, you know, making a decision, sending it out there, and then looking at the resulting data and seeing, is this detailed enough, or do we need to take this up one higher level? So some of those capabilities will just depend on the architecture that you do choose to deploy for your needs.
One other question that came in, I think we saw in the chat, and I think it was answered, but just to touch on it for everyone else, a little bit more on the technical side, but with GA4, today it is a separate Google Analytics property entirely. So part of the reason why we say dual tag is because it is separated from Universal Analytics. This also means downstream systems or other integrations such as Data Studio or other dashboarding tools, advertising tools, et cetera, have to also be integrated or connected to the GA4 property as well. So there's, they are two separate properties, so would need their independent integrations and independent builds, if you will, with dashboards and other things that you might have in place today. So. little bit on the tactical side, but just wanted to touch on that as well. I'm not sure if we had any other questions, but also want to be conscious of time. So maybe we can just jump to the next slide, which if you have more questions, let us know. We love talking about this stuff all the time. We're happy to be partners with Google closely on future rollouts, but also with any of the attendees on the call. We know it's can be looked at as a massive transformation, because it is totally a new version of GA. But again, we work with hundreds of thousands of partners and global websites to make the migration, dual tagging, realistic and also valuable for you. So let us know. And if you want to explore yourself, I think the next slide shows our resource hub, where we have tons of content constantly updating with the latest and greatest from what we're learning or what we're testing and deploying with our clients and partners. So feel free to check out that resource as well. Thank you very much.